In the not so distant past, most people got married young and their marriages lasted a lifetime. This is much different from many marriages today. But why the change? Has there been a change in human DNA? No, just a change in the attitude of a large portion of Western society. Back in the day, most people understood they were not perfect and that the person they would choose to marry was also not perfect. As a result, they entered into marriage happy to be with someone who shared most of their values and was willing to work side by side to build a future together. In our modern Western world, those values have been slowly disappearing as many persons now focus on getting married to the prettiest or most handsome person they can find, as well as someone with almost perfect physical attributes. Obviously, this is not a realistic approach, and with the passage of time, some persons eventually end up marrying someone who they consider their last chance. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but if you've committed to someone and that person has committed to you, then you should be giving your all to make that marriage work. Unfortunately, many persons don't do that, and instead of valuing and working with what they have, they fantasize about what they wanted to have or what someone else has. Now, you're probably wondering what this introduction has to do with a Nikon CoolPix P950 camera, right? Let me explain. The CoolPix P950 is a bridge camera, a glorified point and shoot camera. It is not a DSLR camera, even though it looks like and can sometimes perform like one. As you've seen in some of my previous videos, there are things I've done with this camera that you normally can't do with a point and shoot camera. So let's not complain about what this camera cannot do, because Nikon did not market this camera to do everything. That's why they make more expensive cameras and lenses. I cannot afford a more expensive camera as well as the lenses, and in most situations, the P950 is sufficient for my needs. So, that being said, it's important then that I learn to use all the features of the P950. When I go on vacation or I do a little trip with the family, I don't want to be carrying around a huge DSLR camera with multiple lenses. I need something that's relatively compact that I can carry around easily without taking up too much space, but will also allow me to take a wide variety of pictures and videos. So in this next series of videos entitled Know Your Tool, I will be discussing the importance of knowing the capabilities of this camera and how to use them to your benefit. In this first episode, I will be discussing the firmware update. Now, to update the firmware, obviously you're going to go to Nikon's website. I'm going to assume that based on your browser language and your IP address, it's probably going to send you or suggest the correct site that you should go to because Nikon is an international company. So here you can see it's asking me, hey, are you in the USA? Do you want to go here? Imaging products. And basically that's where we would click imaging products. So we click that, English, we get another website opening up and we click support, product support. It changes and we go to cameras because we're trying to get the firmware for our camera. And then it's a CoolPix camera, so we click here. And then on the right here, we click firmware. Now, in order to pull up the correct firmware, it's gonna want to know what version of the CoolPix camera we're using. So we type CoolPix P950. And then we see that option pops up. So we click it, we do a search, and then this is our camera. So we come here, we hit firmware, and we see there's a version 1.3. Now we already checked my camera and my camera is not running version 1.3. So this is something I'm going to need. So let's download that. Scroll down, click accept, and then we hit download. And then here you can see I've already downloaded it, so I'm actually cheating. So I downloaded it again. But let's move on to the next step. Now, when you're downloading the file, make sure you know where your file is being downloaded to. In my case, I downloaded it to a folder called Nikon stuff. So having downloaded the file, let's right click that and let's click open. And what that will do is that it will create another folder called P950 update. So let's double click that and let's copy this folder called firmware. And then I'm going to go to my memory card right over here, and I'll just paste that folder right there. Good. So having put that folder there inside the memory card, I can now take the memory card over to the camera to do the firmware update. Firmware updates are improvements that the manufacturer has made to a product software after the product has been released to the public. A firmware update might contain a fix to a known issue, or the manufacturer might add additional features to the device. Since these electronic devices are controlled by microprocessors, which are basically the brain of the system, a firmware update can provide additional instructions to the microprocessor, which will allow it to perform better or do new things. It's a good idea to check the support page for your camera every 6 months to see if a new firmware is available and what issues are addressed in the new firmware. So with the camera on, let's hit the menu button. Go across, scroll down, firmware version, and it says, do I want to update to a new firmware? Now, the reason why it's asking me is that I actually put a memory card in that has the new firmware, and since I want to update the firmware, I'm going to click yes. So while we're waiting on that to update, I just want to say that before you do an update, make sure that you're using a battery that has enough power, maybe a fresh battery, because the last thing you want is for the battery to die during a firmware update. That's a serious thing, and that can actually cause permanent damage to your camera, which would require sending it into Nikon to be repaired. So here we see the firmware update is complete. And so having completed the firmware update, it's now asking us to turn off the camera. So let's turn it off. Now that it's off, let's turn it back on. Good. So with the camera back on, let's hit menu, go across, scroll down, firmware version. So it's at version 1.3. Since we did not remove that memory card with the firmware, it's asking again if we want to update, and basically we're going to say no. So we know it's now running 1.3. We have the latest version, and so we're good to go.